Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about big cubes 6x6 and 7x7. I've been asked a few times to make this video once again recently, and I thought maybe it was time. So I'm going to show you guys what I do when I solve big cubes and some tips and tricks that I use. I want to preface this by saying that these tips are primarily for people who are trying to get sub 3 on 6x6 and sub 4 on 7x7, sorry, as I averaged about 220 on 6x6 and 3.5 minutes on 7. So how I want to structure this video, we're going to go through each cube individually because they are a bit different, and then I will have some overall arcing tips at the end that I think are really important for both cubes, and we will get right into this. So we're talking about 6x6 first. 6x6 is a wild animal when it comes to big cubes because there's so many fun and helpful things that you can do on this cube to make your life easier. And first, I'd like to talk about centers. So the average way that people do centers, probably, I would assume if you're watching this, you probably do bars where you're going to just build up bars like this. And that's fine, but there's some other ways you can build centers. So for example, we can start by building blocks, and then we can keep building these little 2x1s. Let's find another one here. Until we have these bars. You can make 2x1s into these bars. So that is something you can do. You can also do them in the middle. So let me just get rid of this really quick here. So for example, say you have this block when you first start your solve. You can build them in the middle. So we can start building this 2x4 here in the middle. Where's that piece? It's down here. So you can do things like this to build this bar, these 2 bars too as well, before you build the other ones. So let's keep going here. I have to build these last 2 bars. And sorry, this is taking a bit longer than it normally would because I'm doing it through the camera, so it's hard to see. All right, so say you have your first center done. If you can, once you get to this last bar as well, if say you have your bar solved here, if you can solve it to the bottom, like so, that helps you look ahead for the top center, and that's something that's good for all big cubes. Like that's something that they recommend on 5x5 as well. All right, here's a perfect example of something we can do. So you see how we have these 2 pieces in the top here where you're building your center? You're not going to want them there. So as you're building other bars, you see I can actually pull those pieces out so they're not on the top anymore. And that is something that you can do just to save yourself some time later, because if I insert like this, these pieces are still on the top. That's not where I want them. But if I, insert to the empty slot and then pull them down, now they're out and I can start building that last bar. Or, build the next bar, and I don't have to worry about pulling them down later, which can take time. That's important. Next thing is to be very, 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 very in tune with your color scheme on 6x6. Same thing with 4x4. This applies to 6x6 as well. You want to know your color scheme because you want to be able to just see. Here I had a 1 move bar. You want to be able to start on any color, because say I have this easy bar. If I have a specific color order, say I have the order where I have to start on green, right? Once I rotate down, the green cases suck when I have an amazing blue bar here, and then right here you have a giant chunk built for you, and you can just do that to build another line. Now, but if I had to start with green, that's all gone. That is all useless because I have a specific order. So you want to be color neutral and know your color scheme really, really well. And that applies to the beginning when you do your first 2 centers too. You want to be able to just start on any center. You want to take advantage of any good case that you may get. So as we're working on our centers here, let's continue here. Our next one would be orange if we're going up. So here's your first bar. I like to insert mine onto the left, and that's just a habit I have. You don't have to. I would recommend it later, and we'll talk about why. But for your last 2 centers, but for your first 2, you can insert however you'd like. All right, so now we have these 2 done. So next would be green. So I'm gonna get to the last two centers, and here's where we're gonna talk about why I like to insert on right. So when you get to the end, it's very convenient to just do R and U moves to solve it. I think it's kind of a pain in the butt to go L moves and switch in between. So first what I would do here for my last two centers is I would build this, because yes, we have a bar here and we have most of two bars here, but I think this is easy because then you can just put two right into the left and then you can go right into this one. Now this is actually a really easy case because it's just that. And then we're on to our last one. And you might be asking, well, how are we going to avoid a commutator here? This is not a case where I personally would avoid a commutator. I am just going to build this and then immediately do a commutator to put it in. And you know, so for last two centers, that's my biggest tip for me personally that I use, is I always put those first two bars on the right. There might be some cases where I don't, and I always go in this order. I go from left to right. I always solve this bar last, and if I have to do a commutator at the end, I do. I'd say about 50% of the time I can avoid commutators by doing it this way. And so that's convenient, because a lot of times, like, I'll get a case like this where I have these two, and then you can just build the bar and put it in. But it's a lot harder to solve this bar here. This bar is a lot harder to solve if you've already solved this bar. So I always solve these two, and then I solve this bar first. For these two, the order doesn't matter which one you solve as much. But once you get to the end, I would do the inner and then the outer bar for the last two. It's a lot easier to do it that way. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Then we're going to get to edge pairing. And for edge pairing, oh, really quick, one last tip for centers. Try to turn as fast as you can without pauses when you do centers. Centers really is about efficiency and speed. So on 6x6, it's really tough to give you like very, very, very specific like cases and tips, because it's so dynamic. There's so many different things you can do. Like we talked about earlier, how we could do 2x1s to make a 2x4 block. You could do like 2x2s. I've seen that before. Some people will solve half of a center and then solve another half. It's called the half center method. I don't use that very much, but it can be convenient sometimes. There's a lot of different ways you can get funky with centers on 6x6 because you don't have a centerpiece kind of locking you in, and that is where you have to really experiment. So I recommend experimenting with those things and getting comfortable with them. Don't try experimenting at competitions. I have done that. It does not work. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for centers. And then as you get better at experimenting with those things and trying them, then you can really focus on like adding a lot of speed, and you'll get better without as many pauses. So next we get to edge pairing, and edge pairing is also kind of fun on 6x6 because there's no center. There's a lot of other things you can do. So what I would see here is I would insert this orange piece and put these two in. Now I don't know where this other orange piece is, but I can do a quick look to see it's there, and then I will just pull it down and I see this. So like you could be very efficient with this. I find that on big cubes, especially for the speed that we're shooting for with these tips, you do have a little bit more leeway. Your look ahead can be better. Because you don't have to be turning really, really fast like the pros. And my look ahead is garbage because I'm looking through the camera. But my biggest tip for edges really is first practice them slow with the goal of not rotating as much and finding your pieces before you're ready to solve them, which I'm not doing an amazing example of here because I am looking through the camera and it's hard, but trust me, do some slow solves. Try not to rotate as much. Try to implement a lot of the tips that you would use for 5x5 edge pairing. They're quite similar, especially for your first four, assuming that we're doing reduction here, where you're just trying to smartly insert your edges. So now that we have the bottom, I always put the 4 on the bottom, that's pretty helpful. And then we can really just go to town on these edges because your look ahead's even better. Things do get a little bit funky though once you get to last 4, so that's where I'm trying to get us right now, because last 4 can get pretty fun. And there's a lot of different cases. So we have the stop. So we get to last 4. We can, all right. So what we do for last 4, there's a few different approaches you can take. The best approach, in my opinion, is to solve it like turn it into a 5x5. So you're going to solve these middle blocks first. But here's an exception to that. I have this and I have this. If I do this, I can connect these two by bringing it down, flipping it, and then bringing it back. That made a whole bar. So in cases like that where we have that easy of a bar, I will always just go and make that bar first, get it out of the way. Now we're down to last three, and this is where you have a decision to make. I like to solve on the M layer like this. Some people like to pull this out and do cycles. You have some choices. I do the M layer, and so like so what I like to do is I'll build my centers to turn it into a 5x5. So now I'm starting to work on these, and so now I have it into a 5x5, and then I'd like to do a lot of slice, flip, slicing. It might not be the fastest way, but it works for me. And by turning those into 5x5s, you know, I get to use those same algorithms for parities and stuff, and then, you know, that makes life a lot easier when you don't have to learn extra algorithms. And then after that, you get to 3x3 stage. And that should be something you're comfortable with if you're attempting a 6x6. So those are just some, you know, pretty basic tips you can work on to help yourself get to sub 3 minutes. Something I'd recommend for a 3x3 stage that I have to do myself, but I've kind of started is, well, first these pairs need to be inserted in the right slots. That would be really helpful. For 3x3 stage, there are some particular algorithms that are a pain in the hind end to execute on 6x6. So for example, there's that G-perm that you have to do the wide moves like that. That one, if you know what I'm referring to, that one is a pain in the rear on 6x6. There are big cube versions of some of those algorithms, and you can, if you feel like it, learn some of those, and those would be helpful to you. But yeah, so my main tips for 6x6 really are turn fast for centers. I think it's okay to slow down a little bit for edges, and, you know, make sure your look ahead's good. Efficiency on edges is more important than speed. I mean, obviously you want to go fast, that's the goal, but if you have to slow down a little bit your TPS from what was your TPS at centers to make sure you're doing edges efficiently, that's fine. And I think it's really important to decide how you want to solve your last 4 edges, and really dig into that and get good at it. Whether you want to do M-slice or you want to do cycles by pulling them up, you know, whatever you decide you want to do, figure it out and get good at it, and get good at doing it quickly and efficiently. And then for 3x3, of course, like I said, if you're interested, you can look up some of those big cube algs. That'll help. And for the centers, the centers, I'm going to link a resource in the description that is very good for going through those weird centers cases and the crazy funky things you can do, because there's so many of them, too many to shove into this video. And so if you practice those things, and you practice, you know, turning fast for centers, and like I said, efficient edges, and, you know, practice your look ahead, I think that you'll really see some significant improvement in your 6x6 times. Excuse me. Next, I'd like to talk about 7x7. Now, 7x7 is similar to 6x6 in the way where you want to turn fast during centers, but it is kind of different because you do have this fixed centerpiece here. So you kind of have to work around that. You don't really have a choice in the matter, because that's just how the cube is. So some interesting tips for 7x7 centers. There's not too many. It's rather straightforward. 7x7 centers really does come down to like efficiency and fast turning, but something that you may want to pay attention to is when you're doing centers, you know, you don't always want to solve that middle bar first. A lot of people gravitate towards the middle bar here. You don't have to do that. You can start with these two, but it's really, really important to keep in mind that once you've solved 2, you want to just go ahead and solve that middle bar, because let's say you, solve like this. Now there's only 2 pieces left that fit here instead of 3. And for example, let's say you insert this bar and this piece is stuck here, right? You have to pull that out. You don't have a choice anymore. Where if you didn't build this first, there's still 2 of these edge pieces here left, the center edge here. You don't have to worry about this being stuck there. You can just go about your business. But if you build this first and this is stuck here, you have to take the time to pull that out. And that will definitely add a second or 2 to your solve, depending on how fast you're turning and processing this. So it's really important to keep in mind, you know, how many bars you've done and like how many pieces that you have left that fit in each slot. So like, you know, in this case, there's 1 here, which means there's only 2 left. You need both of those for that center bar. Where if you build this, well, now there's 2 left and 1 of them is stuck. So that's something that you can pay attention to. So we'll just pretend that I didn't build that bar. And that's when you would want to go into building your middle bar here and putting that in, because then you don't have to worry about that. And then this last piece actually miraculously ended up right there. But that is something to keep in mind on 7x7 centers. For 7x7 centers, you can still build blocks like this. It's a little bit more tricky on 7x7, but you definitely can still do it. So you can still build these 2 bars, insert them, and then remember we have to build this bar here. So we can do that, and then put it in. So yeah, you can still do things like that. It's just, I wouldn't do anything more than like a 2x5 on 7x7, because if you do anything else wonky, it gets a little bit confusing and can be kind of a pain in the butt. So yeah, you can still do those kinds of things, but I wouldn't do anything more crazy than that. This one, luckily, you don't have to know your color scheme. And it's a similar concept to, you know, pretty much everything I've been talking about. So if I wanted to build this bar and then I built, let's see, this bar, I still want to go ahead and do the rest of the blue center here. So I want to make sure I put that in, because you're going to have the same problem where it's like, okay, I have to build these bars, but I got, if I build these 2 on this side, and well, now I got pieces stuck and I have to take time to move them out. So I follow the same concept for that. And then for my last 2 centers, which we'll get to here in a second, oops, I messed that up. All right, so last 2 centers, I follow the same patterns that I do on 6x6. So I'm gonna try to solve these first 2 bars. Again, it doesn't matter which order I solve them in, I just want to solve them first. And then I'll worry about finishing this if I need to. You can do this first, absolutely, especially if you have a really easy case, absolutely do it. But what's fun is you can actually put this bar up here. And now that was a bad case because these were in that layer. But if I say I do this, right, I can still mess around with these and then put it back in. You just got to be careful. So I still want to solve these 3 in this order first. Not necessarily in this order, but I want to solve these 3 first. You can start with this bar, or you can build these 2 and then build the center. It doesn't really matter. I want to do these 3 first. In any order, but these 3 first. And then we're going to get to our last 2 edges. Now in this case, we actually have a lot of pieces together, so it's just a matter of doing the U, M2, M, or M, U2, M prime, or whatever, you know what I'm talking about, to build this bar. And when I built that, you know, I have most of this bar built. So I would do the same thing I would do on 6x6 for the last bar. I'd build what I can and then do a commutator. But what I like to do is I'd like to get myself down to 1 commutator tops. I'm just trying to mess up this as much as I can, right? So like if I was to put this in the way that it is, right, I would have to do 3 commutators, right? But what I can do is, because I know that I can do MU2Ms a lot, I know I can do what I just did, and then I can put this up and do it again, and it's done. And then I don't have to like do the whole commutator thing, and I find it a lot easier to do these kinds of moves than it is to like be like, okay, I have to do this, then I have to come down here and do this, and or you know, go up, if however you do it. So I always try to do 1 commutator max on that last edge, if that makes sense to you guys. And then for edge pairing, a lot more straightforward, because there is defined center pieces. So I'll just build my edges here, and then we can talk about last 4, because it's pretty much the same. Same tip to, you know, practice doing them slow down a little bit when you're solving, just a smidgen, to make sure that your look ahead is good, and just build your edges. And then I like to put, again, like I said, I like to put all my first 4 as solved edges on the bottom or the top, wherever you keep them. Preferably the bottom is probably the best place to keep them. Where's that piece? And, you know, just try to, you know, practice your look ahead for these. That's the most important for like your first 8 edges here. So yeah, I built the first 4 here. Now I don't ever have to flip back over again. The bottom edges are solved. You don't have to worry about them. That is going to speed you up a little bit because you're not having to look for pieces. I don't know why I inserted that. Also, another tip for edges is if you have to slice, flip, slice more than once, it's a bad edge. It's a bad edge to try to solve. And I would recommend trying to solve a different edge and move those pieces around to make it better. So like this case, I already slice, flip, slice once, and I gotta do it again. If you can avoid that, I would recommend it. So now we have our first 8 edges solved here. So we're gonna realign everything. And I like to solve pretty much the same way as I would 6x6. I like to break it down into 5x5 edges. So I don't see much, so I'll do the trick there, the MU2M, and then I just start. I also use the M slice on 7x7, and I just start solving them. In this case, I have to do this alg. You can do that before or after you pair up the edge pieces, these inner midge pieces, to the corners. That's up to you. I like to do it before because I find it confusing to do it after. But some people can do it like that, where they'll solve the corner and the midge first, and then they'll do the parity alg. And in some ways that might be more efficient, but for me, I find it easier to just do the parity alg first, because if I don't, then I will probably confuse myself, and that's something I could practice, but I don't feel the need to yet. And so yeah, it's the same thing as 6x6 edges. I like to really just pick a method and stick to it for my edges. You know, whether you're going to use the M slice, or you're going to pull out and do cycles, or you're going to use the, you know, however you're going to do it. Like I said, just pick a way and stick to it and get good at it. Get really good at it. And yeah, so just, you know, again, for this, do slow solves. You know, practice your look ahead. Figure out how you like to do your centers, what tricks you like to use. Again, pretty much the centers on 7x7 are a lot more straightforward. There's a lot more bar building than on 6x6. And make sure you're keeping track of your pieces if you're not building your center bar first, because that might not always be the best bar to build right away. And those are like some more specific 7x7 tips, right? So here are some tips for both puzzles. They will apply to both. They will be helpful for both. They'll be helpful for 5x5 and 4x4 too. But 4x4 and 5x5 are, you got to be a little more specific, because there's different things for those. So Do not underestimate slow solves. They're very helpful. They help you practice your look ahead. You might see things that you don't normally see. You might be like, oh, I want to try doing this, because you can while you're doing a slow solve. And practicing those kinds of things is really important. You want to be able to stop and be like, okay, well, you want to look at a case and be like, what is the best solution to solve this? And, think about how you're going to go about it, and then practice it, try it, see what happens. Especially on 6x6. 6x6 gets so funky because there's no centers, and it's, more involved. Because there's a 4x4 in the middle. You can get really funky and do some really neat stuff on 6x6 centers. And the only way you're going to get good at those things is practicing them. 7x7, again, a little bit more straightforward for centers and how you build them. So there's some funky things you can do, but not as nearly as many. Another tip that I actually use myself is, like I said, I try to turn as fast as I possibly can when I'm building centers. Because centers have the ability to be the longest part of your solve. And so I just turn really fast. I'm tracking pieces, building bars, building blocks. And as you do slow solves, you'll get better at, identifying the blocks. How can you use those blocks and keep them together for your advantage? And what are some neat ways to insert these edges or these, bars and whatnot and all that stuff. You'll practice that in slow solves. And then when you get to your fast solves, you're going to turn as fast as you can. But I don't like to keep that speed going into my edge pairing. I like to slow down just a bit, because if you slow down slightly from that speed, your look ahead for edge pairing is better. And again, edge pairing also has the ability to be the boggiest part of your solve if you're not getting good look ahead. So I really like to focus on look ahead more for edge pairing. Not that it's not important for the whole puzzle, but if you can slow down just a smidgen from your center speed to your edge pairing speed, you'll probably get better look ahead, and you'll find the more efficient cases and the edges with bigger blocks, especially on 7x7. I find a lot of times on 7x7, you're going to get a lot of pre-built blocks for you. You don't necessarily have to preserve them, but if you're good at seeing them and finding pieces that go with them, you can be more efficient in that way, because the more stuff that's solved, the less stuff you have to solve. And you can do that in 6x6 too, but I find that there's less, because there's less pieces, and that makes sense. So that's another really general tip that applies to both is, centers really fast, slow down a smidgen for edge pairing. You won't regret it, especially if you've practiced your look ahead. And then finally, this is going to seem a little counterintuitive, because we're talking about big cubes, but practice 3x3 too, because let's think about it like this, right? Say it takes you 20 seconds to solve a 3x3. That's probably going to be more like 25 on a big cube, because when you go to solve a 3x3, you're going in with, your cross, you have that planned out, you might have your first pair planned out, etc., etc. When you're solving on a big cube, when you go to finish those last two edges or last three edges, whatever, you gotta do a cycle or something, you may not have the best look ahead because you didn't get to inspect for your cross. So, I mean, yes, you want to be looking for those things when you're working on your last edges, but I estimate that you're going to add some time onto your 3x3 solve, comparative to, So, practice 3x3. If you can get that 20-second average down to, say, 15, that's approximately 5 seconds taken off of your big cube solve. And the closer you get to your goal of sub 3 or sub 4, the 5 seconds might actually matter. And so, that's something that I've been working on myself, and I've seen a bit of improvement in my big cube solves. Is the better I get at 3x3, and the better I get at 3x3 look ahead, the easier it is for 3x3 stage on the big cubes. And although it's not as important as the other things we've talked about today, being able to cut a few seconds off your 3x3 time will help your big cube time. You'll be able to cut a few seconds off of that as well. So, those are all of my tips for big cubes, specifically 6 and 7. If you have any questions or want to know anything deeper, I might be able to answer some questions in comments, or I know the resources to hook you up with. Also, feel free to join the Discord server. We can talk a lot more about cubes, and there's a lot of people in there who know a lot of things, and we can get a lot of resources to you and help you get better at big cubes. So feel free to do that. The link is attached to my channel, and I will also put it in the description. Also, if you enjoyed this video or you think it was helpful, please consider subscribing. I really do appreciate that, and I hope that you guys meet all of your goals of big cubes, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.